The neon sign above the bar flickered weakly. The word "open," an ironic promise in this rain-soaked corner of the town. Inside, Ranger Ellis slumped at the counter, the weight of the day pressing down on her. The scent of stale beer and damp sawdust was a stark contrast to the fresh air of the mountains, yet she craved the numbness this dingy refuge offered. "Rough night, Ranger?" The bartender, a weathered woman named Sue, slid a chipped mug towards her. The coffee inside was lukewarm, a perfect match for Ellis' mood. Ellis sighed. "Rough few weeks, to be honest. Disappearances, worried families." She took a bitter sip, the warmth doing little to chase away the chill that had settled in her bones. Sue nodded sympathetically. "Folks around here are getting spooked. Say it ain't natural. What's happening in those woods?" She leaned in, lowering her voice. "Heard tell of a fella. Lives out in the thick of it. They say his family's been there since forever. Might know things the rest of us don't, if you get my meaning." Ellis's exhaustion-dulled mind latched onto the words. It was a thin lead, but better than nothing. "How do I find this guy?" she asked, a sliver of hope reigniting within her. "No roads out to where he lives," Sue replied. "Best chance is heading out on the old logging trail. About a mile in, there's a path that veers off. He's somewhere at the end of it." She hesitated. "If he's even there at all. Man ain't exactly fond of company." The rain had turned the winding dirt road into a treacherous mess. With each turn of her truck's wheels, Ranger Ellis cursed herself for not checking the weather forecast more thoroughly. But desperation fueled her, the image of Sarah's face, and the echo of her mother's sobs driving her forward. Then, through the sheets of rain, she saw it. A ramshackle cabin, barely more than a hut, hunkered on a patch of higher ground. A thin curl of smoke rose from a crooked chimney, a sign of life in this desolate place. Knocking on the warped wooden door, Ellis felt a familiar unease. This wasn't merely a remote location, it was a testament to stubborn isolation. The door creaked open, revealing a figure in the shadows. A man, younger than she'd expected, with a face lined by a life spent outdoors, peered at her with wary eyes. There was no welcome in his gaze, only suspicion. And then she saw it, the glint of polished steel. A shotgun cradled loosely, yet not casually, in his arms. "Get off my property," he growled, the words muffled slightly through a bushy beard. Ellis kept her hands visible, a gesture of non-aggression ingrained through training. Years on the job had taught her how quickly a situation could escalate with a panicked recluse. "Ranger Ellis," she introduced herself, slowly pulling out her badge and holding it up. "I'm investigating the disappearances. Thought you might know the area, maybe seen something relevant." The man's eyes flicked from her face to the badge, then back again. The shotgun didn't lower, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Ain't seen nothing the reports don't already say. Folks getting lost, that's all. Happens in these woods," he replied, his voice still gruff. He made to shut the door, but Ellis wedged her boot in the gap. "Look, I get that you value your privacy," she said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "But people are scared. Something bad's happening out there. And maybe," she hesitated, the words feeling foolish even as she spoke them, "maybe you know stories, things your grandpappy told you, things not in any official records." Silence settled, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. Finally, the man grunted. "Fine. Come in, for you catch your death." He shuffled back into the gloom of the cabin, leaving the door slightly ajar. With a flicker of hesitation, Ellis stepped inside. The cabin was surprisingly tidy, considering its ramshackle exterior. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting a flickering warmth into the room. The man gestured towards a worn armchair near the fire, setting his shotgun down with a heavy thud. Ellis took the offered seat, acutely aware of the weapon within his reach. The cabin felt both oppressive and strangely comforting after the rain-soaked chill outside. Now, the man said, his voice slightly less gruff now that they were out of the downpour. What's this about old stories and disappearances? Ellis took a steadying breath. This was her chance. Look, I know it sounds crazy, she began, but official reports can only tell you so much. Sometimes there are things lurking under the surface. Stories passed down through generations, warnings about these woods, a flicker of something. Was it disbelief or recognition? Danced across the man's face. My granddad, he said slowly, staring into the fire. He used to tell tales about a presence out there, old as the land itself. He glanced at Ellis, gauging her reaction. Something with a hunger that ain't natural, and with those final words, a door swung open into a world of shadows and whispered legends. A log crackled in the hearth, sending a shower of sparks dancing upwards. The man leaned forward, long shadows from the firelight contorting his face. They called it Naraka, he began, his voice low and rough. Not a man nor a beast, but something older, a spirit bound to the very bones of these mountains, feeding off misery and fear. He paused, as if gathering the right words to paint a picture of an ancient terror. They say it used to sleep most of the time, he continued, his gaze fixed on the flames as if seeing echoes of the past within them. Then folks with hearts black as midnight came along, did some ritual. He waved a hand dismissively. Chanting and sacrifices, the usual nonsense folks get up to when they meddle with forces they don't understand. A chill ran down Ellis's spine, a premonition that the neat compartments of her worldview were about to shatter. And they woke it up? Ellis pressed, unable to hide the unease in her voice. The man nodded grimly. Woke it and fed it too. See, Naraka, it ain't like any predator you've ever tracked. It craves more than just flesh and blood. It feeds on despair. On that moment when a person knows they're facing something they can't fight, can't run from. His eyes, reflecting the firelight, seemed to blaze with an intensity fueled by generations of whispered warnings. That's why folks vanish without a trace. It don't leave nothing behind but the echo of their terror. The man took a long pull from a chip mug, the liquid inside likely something far stronger than tea. His gaze seemed to travel far beyond the confines of the cabin, settling on a time Ellis couldn't imagine. Grandad, he wasn't one for spook stories, the man began, his voice taking on a rougher, more somber tone. But there was one tale he told, made the hair stand up on the back of my neck even as a boy. Happened right here, in these woods. He drew in a breath as if steeling himself. There was a logging crew, back in his younger days, rough men, not the type to scare easy. Yet something happened out there, something that broke even the toughest among them. The man's eyes gleamed with the reflection of the fire, holding Ellis's gaze captive. They found their campmate, or what was left of him. Not a mark of violence, mind you, just his body, curled like a frightened child, eyes wide open with a terror that went deeper than any wolf or bear could cause. And the trees around their camp, he paused, a shiver rippling through him. They were clawed, the bark stripped away, but the claws weren't no animals, too big or wrong, and carved into one of the tree trunks, a single, monstrous eye, staring back at those poor souls. The air in the room hung heavy, filled with an echo of that long-ago horror. The crew scattered after that, he continued, the words catching slightly in his throat. Some never came back to these parts. Grandad, he said whatever they'd seen, it wasn't something that could be fought with axes or guns. It was elemental, a part of the darkness that the trees themselves whispered about on windless nights. Ellis felt a familiar, stubborn skepticism struggling against the primal unease twisting in her gut. Yet, the sheer conviction in the man's eyes held her tongue. It was easier to dismiss him as a crazy hermit if he hadn't struck a nerve with that chilling tale. What about? How do you stop something like that? She found herself asking, her professional instincts demanding at least an attempt at finding a weakness. The man let out a bitter laugh. "If I knew that, Ranger, I wouldn't be living out here in the middle of nowhere, would I? Grandad said there were tales. Old stories from before settlers messed things up round here. About ways to appease it, to drive it back to sleep." He rubbed his beard thoughtfully, and for a moment the wary recluse seemed to fall away, replaced by a man wrestling with an inherited burden. "Thing is," he continued, "those rituals, they ain't nothing pretty. They ain't about defeating evil, more like containing it. Feeding the beast a little, to keep it from devouring the whole damn forest." His gaze hardened, landing on Ellis with unsettling intensity. "And if what those folks did truly woke Naraka up, then appeasing it ain't an option anymore. We might be looking at something far worse. A hunger that won't be satisfied with scraps." The silence that settled after his words was not like the peaceful quiet of the deep woods. It was an expectant hush, as though the very cabin walls held their breath, waiting for the next horrific chapter in a story centuries in the making. The fire crackled, a jarring sound in the tense silence that had settled over the cabin. Ellis finally broke the quiet, her voice hesitant yet firm. "You mentioned folks meddling with things they don't understand." She chose her words carefully. "Those people who woke Naraka up, did they leave any signs? A place they might have done their ritual?" The man's eyebrows shot up. "You suspecting this ain't just some natural occurrence, that there's folks to blame for this mess?" Ellis shrugged, the gesture stiff in the confines of the small cabin. "Desperate times call for considering all possibilities," she replied, "including that whatever those logging crew folks encountered back in your grandfather's time might be happening again." A flicker of recognition crossed the man's face. "There's talk," he said slowly, weighing his words, "about strange lights seen deep in the woods, chants echoing where they shouldn't be, folks going missing who were drawn to tales of old powers lurking beneath the surface." He leaned forward, the firelight dancing on his weathered features. "If there's a bunch of fools dumb enough to go poking a sleeping dragon, they wouldn't be advertising it. But there's places, old ruins, a clearing near a waterfall, the kind of spots the old stories mention." His voice trailed off, the unspoken implication hanging heavy in the air. Naraka's awakening wasn't an act of nature. It was the result of human greed, of meddling with forces far beyond their control. "And if we find them," Ellis began, her mind racing, "could we undo what they've done, drive this Naraka back?" The man's grim expression was answer enough. "Too late for that, most likely," he said with a sigh. "Best we can hope for now is to find where them fools did their ritual. See if there's anything to be gleaned about this creature. Maybe," he added, the barest hint of a bitter hope in his voice, "there's a scrap of knowledge that might help us fight back, if it comes to that." The rain outside had slowed to a steady drizzle, a rhythmic counterpoint to the pounding of Ellis' heart. She rose from the armchair, its warmth a fleeting comfort she would soon have to leave behind. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, gratitude warred with trepidation within her. This wasn't just another investigation, it was a descent into a realm where shadows held more truth than sunlight. The man, she still didn't know his name, grunted in reply, his gaze already distant. "We go at first light," he said curtly. "The rain will have washed away most tracks, but there might be something those fools left behind. Something that'll tell us what kind of hell they unleashed." He moved towards the window, peering out at the darkness-shrouded forest. "And remember," he added, his voice taking on an ominous tone, "Naraka, it ain't just hunting. It's watching, listening always. Knows we're talking about it, even now." A bone-deep chill settled over Ellis, far colder than the damp mountain air. The rain pattering on the roof suddenly sounded like claws scrabbling against the rough wood. She looked at the shotgun propped against the wall, wishing its sense of security wasn't such a fragile illusion. They were no longer tracking a predator. They were entering a battleground haunted by a monstrous entity that existed beyond the boundaries of the world she knew. And as the last embers in the fireplace faded to ash, Ellis couldn't shake the terrifying certainty that come morning, she would be stepping irrevocably into darkness.